Hello, and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles. This is a platform where we share stories of love, loss, and the twists and turns that life can bring. Please subscribe to support us and stay tuned for more captivating chronicles. My wife, Rachel, and I grew up in the largest town in our area, home to nearly 30,000 people. We knew each other from a very young age, around 6 or 7 years old, although I can't specifically remember when we first met. What I do remember is that we were practically inseparable throughout our childhood. When we turned 16, our friendship evolved into something more and we started dating. By the time we were 18, we made the decision to move away from our hometown to work in a city just a few hours' drive away. By the age of 20, we were married and had bought our first house together. It felt like the beginning of a beautiful life together. However, at 22, our joy turned to sorrow when we discovered that Rachel was pregnant with a boy. We were overjoyed, eagerly anticipating the arrival of our child. But then, disaster struck. About 5 weeks before Rachel was due to go on maternity leave, a large shelving unit at her workplace collapsed and crushed her. I was devastated to learn that both she and our unborn child were killed instantly. The tragedy didn't end there. 2 of Rachel's colleagues were also injured in the accident, with one left paralyzed and the other losing his leg, which had to be amputated. It was a grim reminder of the cost-cutting measures taken by her company, which had chosen to continue using old shelving that had been declared unsafe instead of replacing it. I still find it difficult to forgive those executives and management personnel who made that reckless decision. Their choices not only took away the love of my life, but also killed our unborn child. I couldn't help but feel that their actions were responsible for this terrible tragedy. Soon after, I was presented with a choice on how to proceed with what Rachel's company called compensation, but to me, it felt like nothing more than blood money. They wanted to settle out of court to avoid a lawsuit, but I was determined to hold them accountable. To clarify, this isn't about revenge. It's about seeking justice and closure. Fortunately, due to the extensive media coverage and involvement of several politicians, the case was settled quickly in court. It took roughly 3 years, during which time the payout for all parties involved was close to 10 times the amount they had initially offered. Many fines were imposed on the company for their breaches of work health and safety regulations. While the legal battle brought some sense of closure, it can never bring back what I lost. My grief is something I carry with me every day. A constant reminder of the precious life that was cut short. In times like these, the support of friends, family, and counseling have been instrumental in helping me navigate through the depths of sorrow. During this challenging period in my life, I continued working in telecommunications. My mother, bless her soul, had moved in to help me cope with the overwhelming grief. I truly believe I would have fallen apart without her unwavering support. Around that time, I was offered a promotion that involved a lot of travel around the state. I knew it would be a demanding role, so I made a request to have an office in my hometown's branch. I wanted to handle business not only across the state, but also in my hometown. Fortunately, they agreed to my request. And after a few months, we settled into a routine. I spent 1 to 2 weeks in the city office, 1 week in my hometown, and 1 to 2 weeks visiting other parts of the state. After a year of this arrangement, I decided to buy a house in my hometown. This allowed me to have my own space and come and go as I pleased without having to stay at my parents' place every week when I was home. This detail becomes important later in the story. Fast forward about 4 years from the tragedy, I had just returned from one of my trips on a Friday. I was at my office checking in on some work when Harry, the branch's managing director and an old friend I had grown up with, walked in. Although we had attended different schools, We had developed a close friendship since my return. Harry asked me how things were, and then he invited me to a house party he was hosting that evening. It was short notice, but I felt like a few drinks with friends were in order, so I accepted his invitation. At the party, Harry introduced me to Catherine. She was a new hire at branch where my hometown's office was located and was getting to know everyone. Despite sounding like a cliché, it was as if fate had brought us together. In those moments, talking to Catherine, it almost felt like Rachel was in front of me instead of Catherine. I won't dwell on the details, but after 2 years of dating, Catherine and I decided to take the next step, and she moved into my hometown house. Everything had been going really well up to that point. Catherine and my parents got along wonderfully, and Rachel's parents were also supportive and happy to see me finding happiness again. For close to a year, everything seemed perfect. However, things began to change. Skype sessions with friends and family were cut short, and suddenly neighbors started telling me about a car that sounded like Harry's frequently parked in the back alley near my house whenever I was away. To add to my growing unease, I found clothes in my wardrobe that weren't mine. All the signs seemed to point to Catherine cheating on me. But when I confronted her, she denied any wrongdoing. She insisted that Harry only came over occasionally to discuss business and never stayed the night. I tried to reassure myself that I was being paranoid and continued as if nothing was amiss, but there was always a nagging feeling that something wasn't right. About 6 months later, I discovered that she had been lying to me. I had just closed a significant contract with a new company, and negotiations had finished earlier than expected. Instead of staying away for a few more days, I decided to pay for an early flight home to surprise everyone. A few hours later, I drove into my hometown and down the alley behind my house, hoping to enter without being seen and give Catherine a pleasant surprise. However, I couldn't help but wonder about the mystery car that had been parked there repeatedly. As I approached, my confusion turned to shock when I realized that it was indeed Harry's car blocking the back entrance gate. If it hadn't been for the high hedge line I had installed a few years back for privacy, I might have driven past my own place without realizing what was happening. I pulled up behind his car, a mix of emotions flooding over me as I tried to make sense of this unexpected situation. As I got out of the car, a strange feeling gnawed at me. It was peculiar that Harry was still here so late, especially when Catherine had always claimed that he left by this time. As I approached the back of the house, my stomach sank when I saw what was happening in my kitchen. Catherine and Harry were engaged in an intimate encounter on the kitchen bench. Time seemed to stand still. There in front of me was my close friend and my girlfriend entangled in a situation I couldn't even begin to comprehend. My mind raced with questions. Was this real, or was I trapped in a nightmarish dream? Why were they doing this in my house? Feeling utterly defeated, I turned and silently retreated without them noticing me. I sought refuge in my car, where I sat for what felt like an eternity. I was overcome with tears, but my sadness swiftly transformed into a fiery anger. The same kind of anger I had harbored towards those responsible for Rachel's death. As a pacifist, I abhorred violence, but in that moment, I knew I had to find a way to make them pay, to dismantle their lives, to hurt them emotionally as deeply as they had hurt me. I carefully moved my car back up the alley, positioning it far enough from my driveway to maintain clear view of Harry's car. Then I walked back to the gate where I could peer into the house and dialed Catherine's phone. They were still engaged in their activities when her phone rang. Both of them glanced at the caller ID and their faces displayed a moment of shock when my name appeared. I could see that Catherine was considering answering it, but they let it ring out after a few moments and resumed their passionately liaison. I dialed once again, And this time, Catherine answered. Just as she was responding, I hung up and swiftly retreated to my car. Moments later, she called me back, her voice carrying a hint of surprise at my late-night call. She acted relieved and happy that I was on my way home, and the call ended quickly after she mentioned she was going to change into something more suitable. Not long after, Harry burst through the gate, half naked, and sped away in his car, as if he were fleeing from a disaster. A small sinister smile crept across my face, knowing the fear that both of them must have been feeling so close to getting caught. I waited a few moments before turning my car into the same spot Harry had occupied moments earlier. The rest of the night was fairly uneventful, and it wasn't until after Catherine had fallen asleep that I silently made my way to my office down the hall. Sleep eluded me, and all I could think about was planning. And plan I did. My mother had always imparted upon me the values of pacifism and allowing cosmic karma to take its course. But in this particular situation, I decided that perhaps karma could use a helping hand. I resolved to punish both Harry and Catherine separately, but with the intent to ultimately destroy both of them. I was aware of Harry's secret drug habit, though it wasn't anything major. He had kept it well hidden, and I had only accidentally stumbled upon it when I noticed some cocaine left out in his place. I chose to feign ignorance, pretending I hadn't seen it when he tried to hastily cover it up. I began making discreet inquiries with some of my less savory acquaintances to procure samples of drugs they were willing to part with. A few days later, I had gathered a sufficient stash to execute my plan. About a month later, I invited friends, including Harry, over for a barbecue night. After ensuring that I had sufficiently intoxicated Harry, I persuaded him to stay the night and sleep off the alcohol. In the early hours of the following morning, I took the drugs in a selection of my personal belongings and strategically placed them in various spots around his car. The largest stash was concealed in his tire well, and I was confident he wouldn't discover them over the next few months as the rest of my plan unfolded. After locking his car, I returned inside to sleep. I also discreetly planted more drug and personal items in his house after driving him home because he was still too inebriated to drive. A few days later, I staged a break-in at my own home by smashing the back pane of my back door into the kitchen and leaving it open. I then headed back into the city to catch a flight. Upon landing, I found several messages waiting for me. One from my clearly panicked mother, who had discovered the broken door and called the police, one from Catherine in tears, and one from the local police requesting me to call them. After returning all the calls, I informed the police that I had been away on business and would be back the following week to speak with them. During my absence, I had Catherine stay with my parents and asked my father to arrange for a local security company to install cameras and an alarm system. Once I returned and followed the usual, "I can't believe this has happened. And why would anyone do this routine?" I conducted a thorough check of the entire house. I discovered that the items I had taken were indeed missing and proceeded to file a police report, hoping that my plan would continue to unfold as intended. I had the security company's representative walk Catherine and me through how the cameras and alarm system worked. Then came the question I had been eagerly anticipating. What happens if we're doing something private and don't want it recorded? Catherine asked this question a bit hesitantly, but I understood the reason behind it. The security representative assured us that it was a common query and showed us how we could disable the recording for certain cameras on the home computer. He explained that we could choose which cameras to turn off if we wanted to maintain our privacy during specific activities. As he was leaving, I asked him if when the cameras were turned off, a notification could be sent out as a security precaution. He kindly came back in and helped me set up email notifications before departing. This was a crucial element in my plan. At this stage, I decided to seek legal advice regarding couples law in my country. I needed to ensure that my upcoming plan could be, and I wanted to avoid any potential financial claims from Catherine. Being the sole benefactor of Rachel's estate, I couldn't afford any surprises that might allow Catherine to claim a portion of the estate. I reached out to our legal advisors who were instrumental in connecting me with an excellent lawyer. This lawyer assured me that based on the circumstances, Catherine and I had not been living together long enough to be classified as a de facto couple. Moreover, the fact that I was solely responsible for paying all the utilities on the property Catherine was living in, and she did not contribute rent, indicated that she had no legal standing to make a financial claim against me. Just to be thorough, the lawyer drafted a legally solid document to safeguard my interests in case any legal issues arose. With this legal assurance in place, I felt more confident about proceeding with my plan. The following week, my workplace approached me with a promotion offer that would involve moving back into the city to manage the team I had been a part of. This role would require less travel, keeping me in one location, and potentially expanding the team to include 3 to 5 representatives who would spend 1 to 2 weeks in larger surrounding towns, including my hometown. I accepted the promotion, and the process of transferring would take about 6 weeks to complete. It was perfect timing for my plan. Upon returning to my hometown the next week, I began setting my plan in motion. One of my first moves was to approach Harry and request approval for 1 week of vacation for Catherine, scheduled for 2 weeks in the future. I told him I wanted to send her a couple of friends on a retreat as a surprise before making a big decision in my life. He enthusiastically agreed and even gave me a congratulatory hug, thinking that I was taking a significant step in our relationship. I hugged him back, concealing my true intentions. I asked him not to inform anyone else in the office about the vacation plans, as I wanted to keep it a surprise. I knew that word would spread regardless, but that was part of my strategy. That evening, I shared the exciting news with Catherine. I told her that I had booked a tropical spa resort for her and 2 friends. All expenses paid for a week. No questions asked. She reacted with sheer joy, screaming like a child who had just been told that all the candy in the store was hers. I then revealed that the following week, I would be in the city preparing for a crucial meeting with one of our biggest clients who happened to be one of my most significant accounts. I explained that I would need some of my team members to assist me. As a result, I wouldn't be able to see her until the Monday she was leaving for her retreat. Although she seemed disappointed, I assured her it would be worth it when she returned, keeping my true intentions well hidden. What I deliberately omitted from my explanation to Catherine was that I had decided to take 2 weeks of vacation on the opposite side of the country. During this time, I mentally prepared myself for the impending chaos that would erupt the moment she stepped foot on the plane. I also relished the first stage of my freedom. 2 weeks later, I returned by plane and began the drive back home. As I neared my house, I couldn't help but notice that Harry's car was parked there. Just like that first night, I had caught them together. I parked my car a little way back and quickly checked the surveillance footage. It was no surprise to find them asleep in my bed. Over the 2 weeks I had been away, I had meticulously recorded their every move. With all the evidence in hand, I made my first call to the police, blocking my caller ID. I posed as one of my concerned neighbors and informed them that I had spotted someone loitering in a car in the alley behind my house. I elaborated, suggesting that this person was passing objects through windows to other cars, all while peering into my yard. I expressed my fear that they might be involved in drug dealing or potentially planning a break-in at someone's property. I provided them with Harry's license plate and a description of him. The police assured me that they would dispatch an officer to the scene within a few minutes. I thanked them and promptly hung up, setting the stage for the next phase of my plan. I made the call to Catherine, telling her that I was about 10 minutes away from home and that I couldn't resist the urge to surprise her before she flew out the next day. Looking back at the surveillance footage now, I can't help but chuckle at the commotion that I'm surprised I didn't hear in those few short seconds. Harry, in a state of half-dress, hastily fled out the back door to his car. At that point, I couldn't have asked for a more perfect scene. As Harry sped away, one of the police cars rounded the corner behind me, spotted Harry's speedy departure and immediately gave chase. After parking and greeting an excited Catherine, we did all the typical couple things. She fell asleep again, but I couldn't close my eyes for even a moment. The next day, Catherine and her friends were whisked away in a car. After they departed, I had to wait a few hours before I began executing the next phase of my plan. I called up my friend who worked as a removalist and apologized for the short notice, but told him that I needed my place packed and moved by Friday. We agreed on a time, and I informed him that he would need to take certain boxes to a storage facility, which he agreed to without any issue. Later that day, I received a call from the police asking me to come and identify some property that they had confiscated from a suspect the previous night. This property matched the description of the items I had reported as stolen. I agreed to myself, pleased that my plan for Harry was falling into place. I responded that I would be there shortly to collect the items. When I arrived at the police station, I discovered that some of the items were still unaccounted for because they must have still been in Harry's house. And the police hadn't searched there yet. By this point, my hometown was abuzz with the news. Events in a small town rarely stay secret for long. Harry was publicly disgraced and promptly fired from his job due to his possession of drugs and stolen property. Both our bosses on behalf of the company extended a formal apology to me during the week. That night, I went to my parents' house and told both mine and Rachel's parents what had happened, though I omitted certain details. I explained that I was moving back to the city after being promoted, but Catherine would not be a part of it. Initially, they were quite upset that I hadn't kept them informed about what was going on, but they were ultimately happy that I had handled everything maturely and hadn't stooped to their level. However, they didn't necessarily agree with how I had chosen to end things with Catherine. After some drinks, laughs, and tears with my parents and Rachel's parents, I went home on Friday afternoon. It had been a busy week organizing various matters in my hometown, such as arranging for cleaners for the following week, contacting the real estate agent to put my house on the rental market, and handling various other tasks at my hometown's office. I packed some of my belongings into my car and then drove to my parents' place to bid them farewell before embarking on the drive. Before leaving, I made a stop at Becky's house. Becky had been one of Rachel's closest friends growing up, and she was the only other person who knew the details of what was happening, especially the truth about Harry. Without her help and support, I wouldn't have been able to organize everything as quickly as I had. I handed Becky a large manila full containing all the evidence I had gathered of Catherine's cheating, as well as a letter and several other legal documents from my attorney which stated that Catherine was ordered not to contact me. I also included details on how to access her belongings, which were located in the storage unit I had rented. After a quick goodbye to Becky, I left and drove back to the city where I would begin a new chapter in my life on Sunday. I woke up to a barrage of missed calls, voicemails, and text messages. It turned out that Catherine had returned home earlier than expected after sensing that something was amiss in town. To her shock, she found an empty house with a "for rent" sign in front of it. Panicked, she rushed to my parents' house only to be met with a closed door. She went on a calling spree trying to reach anyone who could provide answers. Eventually, She managed to get in touch with Becky, who had informed her about the package I had left for her. As I anticipated, Catherine didn't take the news well. My phone was flooded with angry texts and voicemails, accusing me of setting up Harry, being deceitful, and more. I was genuinely concerned that she might show up at my front door, but nothing ever came of it. 5 weeks later, after leaving and being promoted, I was beginning to settle into my new life and put the tumultuous past behind me. Dear listener, if you have reached this far, please consider subscribing our channel, as it helps and motivates us to continue our work.